The Syrian resistance against Bashar al-Assad is giving nightmares to the Zionists. They fear what could really happen if Bashar al-Assad is removed from power. And it's not just Israel. The West, Russia and even the Arab countries are terrified that a popular uprising might complete its task even after a decade since the start of the uprisings in 2011. But why are some confused about Israel's position on Assad's regime? Some argue that Israel and the West are actually supporting the resistance movements against Assad because they claim Assad is the last of the Arab anti-Zionist leaders in the region. This isn't just coming from pro-Assadists or pro-Iranian or pro-Russian supporters. Some sincere Muslims are also confused about this. So I want this video to be absolutely clear. Not only Israel but the West and other pro-Zionist Arab regimes want Assad to remain in power.
אחד אני אישי بعد کیومو של اسد که הוא אויב חלש ואויב חלש משרת האינטרסים שלי. אף אחד לא מבטיח לי אחרי נפילת אסד מי יגיע. יכול להיות אויב יותר סורר מהמשטר האיראני. מי יכול להבטיח לי? עכשיו אני יודע, יש לי אסד חלש שכל שני וחמישי אני יכול לתקוף את סוריה בתיאום מול רוסיה וללא שום איום. אז אחד, אליהו יוסיאן במצב הנוכחי As
we saw in the clip from Israeli news, Eliyahu Yossian, a former Israeli intelligence officer, stated clearly that he saw Assad as a useful, weak enemy. He mentioned that Israel can attack Syria anytime in coordination with Russia. Why coordination with Russia? Because Russia made an agreement when they sided with Assad against the resistance movements that Russia would not interfere, stop or use its anti-missile system or fighter jets to stop any Israeli attack against Syria, whether it's against Assad's forces or resistance movements. Look at this headline from 2022. At the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Times of Israel stated the Russian embassy in Israel said that military coordination with Israel in Syria will continue even as the two countries spar over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The problem is some people who make shallow opinions about Syria simply don't follow the news, aren't aware of geopolitics, or just get their information from pro-Russian backed Twitter accounts. Look, I've been following politics of the Muslim world for about 30 years now. I remember in 2010, just before the Syrian uprising, when Syria was looking to enter a peace agreement with Israel, heading towards normalizing relations. Remember also, since 1973, the Assad family dictatorship has kept the Golan Heights secure for Israel. They had practically given up on reclaiming this territory, which was taken in 1967. That's 50 years of capitulation, first on Hafiz al-Assad and then under his son Bashar after he inherited the power. When the Arab Spring spread to Syria in 2011, the Zionists were clear about who they wanted to support. Former IDF Chief of Staff Daniel Halutz said, "At the moment it looks like even the rest of the world understands that they cannot replace Assad regime as long as they don't know who will take its place. Right now, it looks like the alternative is forces that will endanger the stability of the region." Again, it's the same point. Assad is better than the alternative because even though they are enemies on paper, Assad provides stability for Israel. Similarly, Israeli Major General Amir Eshal stated in 2013, "If Syria collapses tomorrow, we could find ourselves very quickly inside this cauldron and on a very large scale because of the enormous arsenal is parked there, just waiting to be looted and could be turned against Israel." So we have a former Israeli intelligence officer speaking to Israeli News Today, former Israeli officers and former IDF Chief of Staff in the past making almost identical points. Israel prefers Assad. They want to keep Assad in power because Assad keeps things stable for Israel. Add to the fact that Assad wanted to negotiate a peace deal with Israel in 2010, and for 50 years they've kept the Golan Heights quiet for Israel as well. Israel fears that the alternative, an alternative system that doesn't respect the same norms that Assad did, one that could be more threatening than Iran, could come to power. That's their fear. Since Hafiz al-Assad's coup in 1971, which was partly justified by Syria's defeat of Israel in 1967, Hafiz al-Assad attempted to justify further his claim and his rule by claiming that he was a bulwark against Israel and Zionist plots. This was a convenient propaganda tool. It was used to bolster his position in the eyes of the Arabs and the Syrians as being this some sort of anti-Zionist figure, as well as being a tool used against anyone critical of his rule, who he would label as a Zionist or Western agent. As an Israeli newspaper March 2011 headline, Israel's favorite Arab dictator of of all is Assad. The article states that both Assad Sr. and Jr. advocated resistance against Israel. However, the slogan was hollow, serving the regime merely as an insurance policy against any demands of freedom or democracy. So any criticism against Bashar al-Assad is labelled as a Zionist plot. As for the West backing of Bashar al-Assad against the resistance movement, that's clear too. In a previous video, which I recommend you to watch after this one, I mentioned quotes from Hillary Clinton, who is Secretary of State, who said Congress believed Bashar al-Assad was a reformer. The White House spokesman also said regime change, at that time at least, wasn't on the table. Similarly, former US Ambassador to Syria Robert Ford stated in 2014, he said, one prominent American observer says, it is folly to think that we can aid the moderate armed fighters to topple Assad, but toppling wasn't our goal before and shouldn't be now. What this former US ambassador is arguing is that arming of the moderates is a way to control the revolution, force it to compromise between the moderate opposition movement and the current Ba'athist Assad regime for some sort of power-sharing government, thereby ultimately preserving Assad and the Ba'athist secular ally infrastructure. Similarly, former CIA Director Daniel Petraeus also made this statement a year later in 2015. He has to go ultimately, but the key word there is ultimately underscored in bold letters, because until we have a sense of what will replace him, we need to be very careful not to push him out, because what comes after could actually be even worse. So Israel's position is that Assad should be supported because he is better than the alternative. Similarly, America saw Assad as better than the alternative, either a power-sharing government with Assad or creating a moderate opposition, if they are possible to be created, that could take power away from Islamic groups or Islamic resistance movements that seek to establish an Islamic system within Syria. There's a recent article in The Spectator, a British political magazine, that's titled Why the West Must Back Syria's Bashar al-Assad. I know this is a lot of information, but I'm trying to underline the point that Israel and the West backed Assad because they see him as better than the alternative to the opposition, which they view as too Islamic. And even when they funded the opposition movement, they were trying to create a moderate opposition movement, not to ultimately remove the Ba'athist secular system, but to engage in a power-sharing deal with it. So what about the Arab rulers? Who do they back? In 2023, the Arab rulers brought Assad back into the Arab League, where he received a warm welcome from the Egyptian dictator Sisi and a warm embrace from Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Months earlier, the Jordanian king was pushing for Assad to reintegrate into the Arab League. Sisi helped Israel place a blockade on Gaza. Jordan opened its airspace to American jets to shoot down drones, and the Saudis are just waiting for an opportune time to normalize relations with Israel. So what does this say about their relationship with a supposed anti-Zionist leader? Similarly, the UAE, which formally recognizes Israel and has close ties with the Zionist entity, has come out in support of Assad even when resistance movements retook Aleppo. So if we look carefully at Israel's position, the West's position, and the actions of the Arab states that aid the Zionists, we see that they're all in support of Assad. This contradicts the narrative that Assad is the last anti-Zionist Arab ruler trying to be taken down by the West. That's just fantasy. Careful study shows the exact opposite. But we don't just have statements from Israel, America, the actions of Arab states. We also have statements from Hamas representatives. Now, this isn't about supporting Hamas, but I want to show you that even Hamas has come out in support of the Syrian resistant movements against Bashar al-Assad. They don't see this as some Zionist conspiracy. Instead, they view it as a struggle similar to their own.
قد مللنا من الحديث الغير واضح. نحن اليوم أخي الكريم إن هذه الجموع التي دخلت حلب كلهم شعارهم الله غايتنا والرسول قدوتنا والقرآن دستورنا والجهاد سبيلنا والموت في سبيل الله أسمى أمانينا. كل التحية للثورة السورية أيها الحمقى، يا من تؤيدون الباطل وتؤيدون القاتل وتؤيدون الظالم. لقد آن الأوان أن تفهموا تماما أن هذا الشعب السوري البطل يتوق لحرية حقيقية، لأنه عنوان البطولة والرجولة والإباء والشموخ. وكل من يشكك بتقدم المجاهدين في حلب أو يشكك في تقدم المجاهدين في حماة، وإن شاء الله سيتقدموا إلى دمشق وإلى درعا وإلى حمص وإلى كل الأماكن، لأنهم والله عناوين حق، وهذا من حقهم، وهذه ديارهم التي أخرجوا منها. كفانا بالله عليكم، كفانا كذبا على أنفسنا وكذبا على الناس إن هؤلاء الطواغيت، هؤلاء الحكام، هؤلاء القتلة آن الأوان أن ينصرفوا، وآن الأوان لشعوبنا أن تخلعهم. فوالله نحن غسلناهم جميعا وعصرناهم وجففنا الغسيل. دول كبيرة، دول عظيمة.
If you're still confused and you honestly think Assad regime is sincere bulwark against Western Zionist interest in the region, then just think about this. The rise of the Alawites to rule over Syria wasn't incidental. It was created by the British and French colonialists. The French used the Alawite minority to help the French occupy and put down any rebellion against their rule. Similarly, the West supported the Alawites to occupy positions of power and influence throughout the army and government. According to some estimates, approximately 80% of government positions are occupied by the Alawites today. And if you are confused further, the Alawis are a secret religious cult that believes Ali radiallahu anh is God incarnate, amongst other absolutely kufri beliefs. Is it then surprising that in 1982 Hafiz al-Assad's forces had graffitied on bombed out buildings in Hama that there is no God but the Syrian state? Or that during the Arab Spring, the Shabiha, who were the pro-Assad Alawi militias who forced captives to declare there's no God but بشر.
يلا خليك معي. مين اللي خلقك؟ بشار الأسد. مين ربك؟ بشار الأسد. مين بتعبد؟ بشار الأسد. لمين بتصلي؟ لبشار الأسد. أيوة هيك أنت هيك. مذهبكم مين؟ بشار. قائدكم مين؟ بشار. ربك مين؟ بشار. الله مين؟ بشار. محمد مين؟ بشار. أيوة. الله ولا بشار؟ مين احسن؟ الله سوريا بشار بس. مين احسن الله ولا بشار؟ بشار. ايوه.
يلا خلاص عندي
تحبوا مين؟ بشار. علي صدقناك. تحبوا مين؟ بشار. بتموت على مين؟ بشار. الله مين؟ بشار. بتحبوا مين؟ بشار. قائدكم مين؟ بشار. الله مين؟ بشار. ربك مين؟ بشار. بتصلي لمين؟ بشار. تعبدون بشار ولا لا؟ بعبد شيء.
بدك تبص خريطة ولا؟
عيدة. لا إله إلا بشار. عيدة. لا إله إلا بشار. عايز لك لا إله إلا بشار. بشار الأسد عيدة كاملة. لا إله إلا بشار الأسد.
This is disgusting. How can you even support this? Their stated ideology is Baathism, which was actually developed by Christian Arabs and is explicitly secular. We aren't talking about oppressive regimes that's ignorant of some rules of Islam. This is clear-cut categorical kufr, a regime that tortures children to death. And don't think this is just about Al-Qaeda and ISIS as being the resistance movements. The uprising itself came from the Syrian people themselves. They're sick and tired of having this kufr and oppression dominate them. So you honestly think that this Assad Alawi Ba'athist regime is sincere, that it's best for the region, that it cares about the Palestinian cause? Come on, don't be naive. They were created by the French. They were supported by the West. Israel and Arab states continue to support them and prefer Assad over the resistance movements anyway. And the only reason why some groups are being funded by Turkey and other Western groups is in order to control them, in order to push them to a path of trying to negotiate a settlement with the Assad regime and thereby preserving the current regime and its infrastructure. But where I will agree resistance movements need to shun the support of Turkey or other external powers who support them for their own interest, their own agenda, who seek to control them down a path of dependency and not one of independence. This is the point. This is what gives the Arab rulers nightmares. This is what gives the West and the Zionists nightmares. An independent uprising that removes the legacy of the colonial era, a potential for real independent change that would inspire the rest of the Arab and Muslim world to throw these post-colonial entities and look for a real independent solution built upon Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us success and grant the success to resistance in order to build this independent future, not just for Syria, but for the Muslim world. Ameen.